Alrighty, hey everybody. So we're on our last topic for this class, for this entire class and this last unit of ecology. So let's dive into it. Here we go. We are looking at how our matter is going to cycle through our ecosystems, and we call these our biogeochemical cycles. So last video we looked at how energy was being really flowing through the ecosystem, and energy can be lost. Only some of it is utilized and kind of transferred from one organism to the next, but matter cannot be lost. And it's just going to be transferred or transformed. It is important to recognize that some of the energy or some of the matter can be lost from maybe that particular ecosystem, but it can move to a different ecosystem. And sometimes we move that matter somewhere else, such as carbon, for instance. We can move it somewhere else. And we'll talk about that. So we're going to be looking at the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and nitrogen cycle. Not in extreme detail because we really don't have the time. I'm going to go over the general, I think the important parts of the cycles and how they relate to ecology. And we're going back to this image again. We've talked about this part, the producers, consumers, decomposers. Those are how our energy is flowing. And now we're looking at our geochemical nutrient cycle, which focuses on how matter is cycling through a system. So nutrients are going to cycle. Our first one we're actually looking is a little bit at the carbon cycle, and just a kind of a quick overview. Photosynthesis is really important for this cycle, and we're looking at how our autotrophic organisms are going to take the energy from sun, transform it into a usable form, really transforming it into sugar. Once we have that sugar, then our organisms can perform cellular respiration. Plants perform cellular respiration, right? Our primary producers do perform cellular respiration, and our consumers will perform our cellular respiration, which is taking that sugar, which is carbon, and breaking it down and turning it into ATP, which is a source of energy. At the same time, that carbon that's being transformed is being released as carbon dioxide. So we're releasing carbon dioxide just by being alive. So that's part of our carbon cycle. And here's a bit more details. So if let's just say, and we have to remember it's a cycle, so it's not like there's just one starting point, but we'll start up here with the atmosphere. So we have carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. We cannot just breathe in carbon dioxide and then use it. It doesn't work like that. Our primary producers, those are our ones that are going to take the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's in a gas state. So they take the carbon dioxide, it's a gas, they're able to use that carbon dioxide, our primary producers can use that carbon dioxide and transform it into a usable form of carbon, really turning it into sugars. And then our consumers, let's say a rabbit here or a fox, they can then eat the producers, which has that carbon. They utilize it, they can grow, and they also, through respiration, through cellular respiration, they are breathing out carbon dioxide, which is putting it back into the atmosphere. Another way that the carbon gets back into the atmosphere is once these organisms die, all of these organisms, really, once all these organisms die, the decomposers, like bacteria in the soil, will break those organisms down. And while they're breaking those organisms down, they are going to be releasing carbon dioxide. Another way carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere is, here's one way, by us, that we take fossil fuels. And fossil fuels, what it really is just decayed and broken down organic material. So lots and lots of dead organisms that have been broken down so much that now they're in like a liquid state, and so they're going to be removed, extracted from the environment, utilized for big factories, for your homes, for cars. And by burning those fossil fuels, by just removing the fossil fuel, you're not really doing anything, but by burning the fossil fuel, then it goes back into the atmosphere. Fires is another way. So deforestation is an example of how we get carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, because what is a tree made out of? carbon. So if you cut down a tree or you burn down a forest, you are releasing so much carbon back into the atmosphere. Not you, but the people that are doing it. They are releasing so much carbon back into the atmosphere. And how do we remove carbon from the atmosphere? Well, plants can do it, and guess what? Humans are destroying huge forests that are really important in taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and making it usable. And oceans are another way that we can, not we, but the oceans will then help to remove some of that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So they're really good at actually absorbing the carbon dioxide. However, levels of carbon dioxide are increasing, and carbon dioxide is acidic, so the more that the ocean absorbs, the more acidic the ocean becomes. And now organisms living in the ocean that are not adjusted to acidic water are having a lot of trouble. So that's something to kind of consider. So that's our carbon cycle, kind of in a nutshell. And I talked a little bit about climate change. I kind of jumped the gun because I'm pretty passionate about it, but these are some things that that I was just discussing, is this idea that because there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, what that does is that results in an increase in this greenhouse effect. So we have this ozone layer that's on the, the outside of our Earth, which is really, really important. We need that ozone layer because it does trap heat. If it didn't trap heat, all the heat that would be here, it would just be gone. It would just be released and we could not live here. So it's really, really important that we actually have a greenhouse effect, but now it's becoming even greater, where less and less heat is able to leave, so it's making the Earth so much warmer, and pretty quick, honestly. And it's because of all this excess carbon dioxide that is being released into the atmosphere. Methane, which is a CH4 right here, that's methane, and that is really a result of big farms that have like a lot of cattle, for instance. They release a lot of methane into the atmosphere, and that also contributes to the greenhouse effect. So all these greenhouse gases that are being emitted are creating a thicker ozone layer and creating an increased greenhouse effect, making everything a lot warmer. And I really wish I could talk more about this because I think it's super interesting and important. So if you're interested in this, you should take environmental science when you're a senior, because it's really cool and interesting to learn about. But yeah, so that's kind of a summary of that. All right, so this is a good, I think, diagram or graph to kind of show how carbon dioxide has been increasing. And as the carbon dioxide increases, we look at the temperature. So when carbon dioxide was kind of low down here, we see that the global temperature was fairly low. As carbon dioxide has increased in more recent times, we see that the temperature has definitely gone up. So there's definitely a correlation between the amount of carbon dioxide and the temperature of the Earth. Right, so this is a little bit more about it. I'm talking about this idea that we're really seeing a lot of the effects of climate change in the Arctic areas, where we're seeing a lot of the glaciers are melting very, very quickly. So that's becoming kind of a problem, and it's really triggering a lot of extreme weather. So we're able to kind of look at those different ideas. Permafrost is pretty important, actually. It's melting very quickly. Permafrost is frozen soil, and because the environment, or because the global temperature is increasing, because it's melting, it's releasing a whole bunch of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And it goes back to that carbon cycle. The environment, if we were here, is very good at making sure that the levels are being maintained. But because we are extracting so much carbon dioxide, it's very difficult for that to stay in check. And now there's like an imbalance, too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and not enough things to take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so here's some pictures just showing the ice difference. In the 1980s, look at all that ice that's there, and then 2010, a lot. It's really dramatically decreased. Glaciers, for instance, look at this glacier in 1920 versus 2005. It's like not even a glacier anymore. So we're really seeing these dramatic changes between the two. Here's a glacier, and no longer a glacier, it's just water now. So big, big changes. And this is a kind of a good summary showing our sources of carbon dioxide, burning the fossil fuels, cellular respiration. Just by being alive, we're expelling carbon dioxide, the melting of the ice. There's carbon dioxide trapped in those ice caps. So by melting them and melting those glaciers and melting the permafrost, more carbon dioxide is being released pretty quickly. And like we talked about before, burning of the forest, trees are made out of carbon. By burning them, we are releasing lots and lots of carbon back into the atmosphere. Keeping in mind that those trees, that forest, is really important and is called a sink for carbon dioxide, for taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and transforming it. And we're destroying that. We're taking a sink of carbon dioxide and just demolishing it. So it's kind of crazy that we're doing that. But a sink for carbon dioxide is something that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So photosynthesizers are those that do that. Oceans can do that. Forests can do that and play a really big role. So we have to make sure we protect those things. And here's some more pictures showing the forest. This is before and here's after. Before, well, not even before, these are all after pictures, just showing that this is our before picture and how we've dramatically changed the land of these different areas for our own good. More pictures of this. And then we're going to look now at our nitrogen cycle. A really kind of quick overview of this, but nitrogen is a really important nutrient that organisms are going to need. Now, nitrogen is another type of gas, so carbon is a gas, and in the gaseous state of nitrogen, we cannot use it, but we really need it. So plants, though, well, actually the bacteria in the soil can take that nitrogen, they can fix the nitrogen. By fixing it, it's really just transforming it into more of a solid form. And then those plants can utilize the nitrogen, they can grow, and then we eat those plants and other organisms, maybe a deer or cattle, they eat those plants that now have the nitrogen in them, and we can now gain nitrogen in a usable form. So the way we gain nitrogen is not by breathing in nitrogen. You can't breathe it in. It doesn't do anything for you. But if you eat plants and you eat animals, that then gives you your nitrogen source, your nitrogen nutrients. And those are really, really important in helping you form amino acids. Remember, amino acids are the monomers for our proteins, and you have lots and lots of proteins that you depend on for survival. So nitrogen is very important for that, and it's also really important for helping you build more DNA, right? Our DNA is constantly being replicated, and so we need more and more nitrogen, and that's how we gain our nitrogen. So that's nitrogen cycle really, really kind of quickly for us. And then our last cycle is the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle is when we're looking at phosphate, it is never going to be in a gas state. So carbon is in a gas state, nitrogen is in a gas state, phosphorus will never be in a gaseous state. And where is it found? It is found underground, and in order to gain access to those phosphates, really it's through geologic uplift. So those rocks are being moved up to the surface of the earth, and then they can be utilized, and they can go, typically what will happen is they will run off into the rivers, fish will then utilize them, plants will utilize them, and then we can eat those things. So you eat the plants, you eat the consumers that eat the phosphorus, for instance, and then we gain it that way. And those are really important for your bones and for DNA. So that's really important for that. So that's just a quick overview of the phosphorus cycle. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is how environments can change, and we call this ecological succession. Really, how is it being transformed into something different due to some sort of dramatic event? And let's look at that really quick. So succession focuses on how the particular environment is changing. So here, this is called primary succession. And primary succession takes a really, really long time, thousands of years for this to happen. But your original environment is going to be composed of just rocks. There's no soil or anything like that in this environment. It's basically lifeless. And what has to happen is there's these things called pioneer species, like lichen, for instance. Lichen can actually live on rocks. And the lichen will break down the rocks to eventually become soil. And then eventually, we have some rocks with moss on them. And then eventually we continue to break down those rocks, and then now you have some grass. And then the grass continues to, prosper Our soil is getting better, more nutritious, and now small shrubs can grow. Once again, our soil is getting more and more nutritious, and now it can actually sustain small trees until eventually we get to our really big trees and we have a forest, for instance, and now we've met or reached our climax community. Now, the climax community could be different for our different biomes. Now, for the temperate deciduous forest, yeah, it's going to become a forest with a whole bunch of trees, and that's going to be our climax community. But for a desert, it's never going to become a forest. It's just going to be composed, for a climax community of a desert, it'd be more like a whole bunch of big cactuses and things like that. But it would never be a forest. So climax community is different for the different biomes. And the climax community really focuses on an environment that is now a bit more stable, that doesn't really get affected by a lot of change. However, things can affect it. So the climax community doesn't mean like, okay, it's a forest and it'll never change. It could change. If there's a big hurricane or flooding or a forest fire, it could dramatically change this particular area, but small things wouldn't really affect it. But that's primary succession, takes a really long time, and it always starts with rocks. And then our second one here is called secondary succession, and this is when there is soil originally present in the ecosystem. So soil is there might be a little bit of grass, and then this time scale is actually quite quick. Maybe 100 years it could take to transform this type of environment into a forest or into a sustainable, or into like a desert that has larger plants. But we start with our soil, we already have some grass, and very quickly we get our shrubs, we get our small trees, and here we are into our climax community of large trees. So much quicker progression. And here, this is kind of defining what I just talked about. Primary succession will probably, or most likely will happen after some sort of event where the soil is just stripped of the land. A glacier could do this, a volcanic eruption could do this, just removes all of that soil and you're only left with rock. For secondary succession, how does this happen? A forest fire, for instance. A forest fire is not going to remove all the soil. It's just going to remove those bigger vegetation. But you're left with soil, and then once it's gone, actually fairly quickly, it'll go back to its climax community where you have your big trees again, and that's kind of an example of that. Or a hurricane could do this as well. Here's some pictures. This is like a volcanic eruption here. We have our lava, the rock, and then eventually it could transform into something, but it takes a really long time. And something called a pioneer species, such as lichen, which is here, can actually live in this type of environment with just rock, and they can be actually breaking down that rock into eventually soil. So pioneer species are the first organisms that occupy that area and really help to transform it. And this is the same thing that we talked about. Last thing we look at is how humans have a big effect on our ecosystems. And really, by us being here, we're threatening a lot of different environments. And so that leads us into what you're going to be looking at today. There's a good video, it's called The Story of Stuff. You're going to watch that, and then there's a few questions that go along with it. And you're really going to be looking at how stuff, such as your clothing, such as your video games, such as your cell phone, how is it produced, and what are the steps that is taken to make those things. So it's really looking at all the stuff that we acquire. How did we come to this kind of society where stuff is really important to us, and maybe it shouldn't be so important to us. I don't know, you kind of make the decision as you watch the video. So you watch it, think about it, reflect on it, answer the questions, and that's what you're doing today. And then a reminder that we have our project due June 12th. Please make sure you get that in. If you have questions about it, please let me know. I cannot accept late submissions, so I need it by the end of the day on Friday. I'll give you till 11:59 on Friday, but I really need it by then. All right? Okay. So those are our notes for today. Nice work. If you have any questions, please email me, and yeah, let me know. So thanks for joining, and have a great day. Bye.